Hello, worthy students, and welcome to the first screencast in our grammar study series called The Complete Sentence. So what is a complete sentence? Well, a complete sentence is a group of words that contains a subject, which is usually a noun or a pronoun, a predicate, which is always played by a verb, a complete thought, and capital and end punctuation. Now we're going to go over these terms, and I just want to tell you guys visually that every time we talk about a subject in a sentence, it's going to be highlighted in blue, and every time we talk about a predicate in a sentence, it's going to be highlighted in red. All right, so what is a subject? Well, the subject of your sentence is who or what the sentence is mainly about. And in order to find the subject, you can look at your sentence and ask this question: who or what is performing the action? Who or what is doing something? The predicate of the sentence is the action of the sentence, or it is a verb that shows a state of being. And in order to find the predicate, you can look at your sentence and ask, what is that subject doing? That will work for an action verb. Or you can ask, is there a to be verb in that sentence? A to be verb is any form of the verb to be, like the words is, are, am, was, were, been, or being. So if you look at this example, Roger Rabbit shook with fear, and you ask yourself, who or what is that sentence mainly about? Then you begin to understand that Roger Rabbit is who or what the sentence is mainly about. And since that is the subject of our sentence, we'll go ahead and highlight that in blue. And then if we look further and we ask, okay, so if Roger Rabbit is who or what our sentence is mainly about, then what is that subject doing? That's going to help us find our predicate. And so if we look and we go, what is Roger Rabbit doing? Well, he's in the process of shaking. He shook. And in that way, we know that it's the predicate. And so we will highlight shook in red. If we go to the next sentence, you can do the same process. He was innocent. Well, who or what is the sentence mainly about? The sentence is mainly about about Roger Rabbit, but since the word Roger Rabbit isn't in that sentence, we have to look for the word that means the same thing as Roger Rabbit, and that's the word he. And then, is he doing anything? Well, in this sentence, he's not. In this sentence, he's in a state of being something, and we know that because the word was is a form of to be. So we know that the subject and predicate are he was. So we highlight he was to show that those are our subject and our predicate, and then we're ready for our next slide. Okay, the third component of a complete sentence is a complete thought, and I want to clarify what that means grammatically. So complete thought is, in fact, a grammatical concept. So to be grammatically complete, all a sentence has to have is that subject, that predicate, and one sort of complete idea. For example, he ran, it fell, wind blew. Those are all complete sentences. They all have a subject and a predicate, and they all have one complete thought. Now, the sentences below those are grammatically incomplete. If you listen to the difference between he ran and because he ran, you can begin to understand the difference between a complete thought, he ran, and an incomplete thought, because he ran. Because he ran forces the reader to think there's something else coming. Because he ran, and then something else has to have happened. He fell, or because he ran, he got away, or because he ran, he had a healthy heart, or something like that. Same is true with after it fell. The words it fell form a complete thought, but the words after it fell form a grammatically incomplete thought. So after it fell requires something else in order to make that one complete idea. And the last one, the wind blew, complete thought. But if you say since the wind blew, you have to wait for something else to happen. Since the wind blew, the man fell over, or since the wind blew, the house fell down, or since the wind blew, the window cracked, or since the wind blew, power was created, or something like that. There requires another part. So those are things that are grammatically incomplete. So we can then color code those complete ideas the same way that we color coded the previous sentences. He ran, it fell, wind blew. In the incomplete section, even though you have a subject and a predicate, you don't have the subject and the predicate of a complete sentence because you don't have a complete sentence. So we won't highlight those in blue and in red. Okay, when you're considering the complete thought, you might get stuck thinking he ran, and you might get stuck on things like, well, who is he? If I don't know who he is, then I don't have a complete thought. Or where did he run? If I don't know he ran to the store, if I don't know that, then it's not complete yet. Or how fast was he running? He ran a 6-minute mile or a 4-minute mile. And so you might get stuck thinking, well, if I don't know all there is to know, then that isn't a complete sentence. But you would be wrong. Those things are writing decisions that you can make if you are writing the sentence he ran. You can choose as a writer to include who he is, where he ran, or how fast he was running, but you don't have to include those to make it a grammatically complete thought. It just is a grammatically complete thought. Now, this is different than using the phrase because he ran. The word because then requires an additional thought in order for that sentence, the because he ran, in order for that sentence to be grammatically correct, you would need something else. If you left it because he ran, you don't have a complete thought, so you do not have a complete sentence. If we understand what complete thought is, then we can go back to the subject, and I want to give you guys just a little bit more information about what the subject of the sentence is. The subject of the sentence, again, that's who or what your sentence is mainly about, is usually a noun or a pronoun. So we're going to just really quickly review those two parts of speech. A noun is a person, place, thing, idea, or emotion. Nouns can be concrete, something you can see or touch, like a rooster man or a gingerbread house, or nouns can be abstract. Those are ideas that you can't actually touch. So a thought like democracy or love. Those are nouns as well. You just can't see or touch them. And we're going to learn more about nouns a little bit later in our study. But for now, I just want you to understand conceptually what a noun is so that when you're trying to analyze sentences, you can try and find the subject of the sentence, because usually the subject of your sentence is a noun or a pronoun. So we are going to watch this little video, and I want you guys in your notes to write down 5 nouns while you're rocking out.
Well, every person you can know and every place that you can go and anything that you can show, you know they're nouns. A noun's a special kind of word. It's any name you ever heard. I find it quite interesting. A noun's a person, place, or thing. Oh, I took a train to another state. The flora and the fauna that I saw were really great. But when I saw some bandits chasing the train, I was wishing I was back home again. I took a train to another state.
Okay, hopefully some of the nouns that you procured there in that last video could be something like Mrs. Jones, lady, Hudson Street, dog, brother, bone, fairy, jukebox, dime, things like that. Anything you can touch or see is considered a noun. Okay, so let's move on to a pronoun. A pronoun's super easy. It is just a word that replaces a noun. Here's an example. Sarah went to the store. She bought bread. Instead of having to say Sarah went to the store, Sarah bought bread, whoever made up our language came up with a whole set of words that can be used instead of having to say Sarah all over again. Those words are pronouns. Now, we're going to talk about 2 types of pronouns right now, and we're going to talk about 3 more types of pronouns a little bit later on. So the 2 types of pronouns I want to talk about right this second are personal pronouns. Those are pronouns that replace specific people, like Miss Jordan could be replaced by I or you or she. If you were to say something like that boy, you could replace it with he. If you were to talk about the desk, you could replace it with the word it, and things like that. Those are personal pronouns. Now, indefinite pronouns replace an indefinite number of people or an indefinite idea. Something like someone, anyone, all, few, others. For example, if you said something like, someone stole my keys, someone is a person, but you don't know which person. So you've just replaced the noun person with the pronoun someone. Okay, we're going to listen to 3 more glorious minutes of Schoolhouse Rock. This time you're going to write down 5 awesome
Now I have a friend named Rufus Xavier Sarsaparilla, and I could say that Rufus found a kangaroo that followed Rufus home, and now that kangaroo belongs to Rufus Xavier Sarsaparilla. Whew, I could say that, but I don't have to, because I got pronouns. I can say he found a kangaroo that followed him home, and now it is his. You see, he, him, and his are pronouns replacing the noun. Rufus Xavier Sarsaparilla, a very proper noun, and it is a pronoun replacing the noun. Kangaroo, how common. Rufus has a sister named Raffaella Gabriella Sarsaparilla. If she found a kangaroo, I'd say to you, she found a kangaroo that followed her home, and now it is hers. But I can't say that, because she found an aardvark that fell in love with her, and they're so happy.
Most of the content of that Schoolhouse Rock video were personal pronouns. She, he, it, they, us, you, them, things like that. You might have seen at the end there were some questions. Those are called interrogative pronouns, and we're going to talk about those later. Things like who, whose, whom. But for now, we're going to shift gears and talk a little bit about the predicate of a sentence. The predicate of the sentence is the action or the state of being. Now, the predicate of your sentence is always going to be the verb, and we're just going to review those quickly. A verb is an action or a state of being. Action verbs are pretty easy to see. Those are things that a person can do, like run or swim or sit or sleep or ride, things like that. So the predicate of your sentence could be the action of a sentence, but not all sentences have action in them. So sometimes the predicate of your sentence is going to be a state of being verb, which means a verb that shows that your subject is in a state of being something, some kind of a describey word. Again, those state of being verbs are be, is, are, am, was, were, been, or being. And here's an example. You could say, the man at the mailbox was sad. So in this case, that man in the mailbox, the man with his head all inside the mailbox with the crushed heart above him, he's in a state of being sad, but sad isn't your verb. Your verb is was. That's showing the state of being. Sad is just the describing word. It is the word that connects the man and his emotion. So sometimes those state of being verbs are called linking verbs because they link the subject of your sentence, in this case man, with the describing word or the word that describes the man, sad. And those two ideas are being linked by the word was. So was then becomes a linking or a state of being verb. Okay, let's find 5 groovy verbs and see if you can tell me whether they are action verbs or linking verbs. Remember, linking verbs are state of being verbs.
I get my thing in action. To be, to see, to feel, to live.
That's what's happening.
I put my heart in action. To run, to go, to get, to give.
You're what's happening.
That's where I find satisfaction, yeah.
Yeah.
To search, to find, to have, to hold.
To be bold.
When I use my imagination, I think, I plot, I plan, I dream, turning in towards creation. I make, I write, I dance, I sing. When I'm feeling really active, I run, I ride, I swim, I fly. Other times when life is easy, I rest, I sleep, I sit, I lie.
That's what's happening.
Okay, some of the verbs you should have seen were things like to live, to run, to grow. Those are all action verbs. Now, if you say to be, then that is a linking verb. Now we're going to try and put all of that together, and we're going to try and see subjects and predicates as a group of words that together make sense. So you are going to watch my favorite Schoolhouse Rock video about Mr. Morton, and you are going to write down 5 subjects and predicates, and I want you to write them down together. So if you hear that Mr. Morton walked down the street, I want you to write Mr. Morton walked. so that you get subject and predicate together.
This is the tale of Mr. Morton. Mr. Morton is who? He is the subject of our tale, and the predicate tells what Mr. Morton must do. Mr. Morton walked down the street. Mr. Morton walked. Mr. Morton talked to his cat. Mr. Morton talked. Hello, cat. You look good. Mr. Morton was lonely. Mr. Morton was. Mr. Morton is the subject of the sentence, and what the predicate says he does. Mr. Morton knew just one girl. Mr. Morton knew. Mr. Morton grew flowers for Pearl. Mr. Morton grew. Mr. Morton was very shy. Mr. Morton was. Mr. Morton is the subject of the sentence, and what the predicate says he does. The subject is a noun. That's a person, place, or thing. It's who or what the sentence is about. And the predicate is the verb. That's the action word that gets this subject up and out. Mr. Morton wrote Pearl a poem. Mr. Morton wrote. Pearl replied in the afternoon. Pearl replied by a note. Mr. Morton was very nervous. Mr. Morton was. Mr. Morton is the subject of the sentence, and what the predicate says he does. The cat stretched, the sun beat down, a neighbor chased his kid. Come here, kid, come on. Each sentence is completed when you know what the subject did. Mr. Morton knocked on her door. Mr. Morton knocked. Mr. Morton sat on her porch. Yes, he just sat there and rocked. Mr. Morton was a nervous man. When she opened up the door, he ran. Mr. Morton climbed up his stairs. Mr. Morton climbed. Mr. Morton rhymed pretty words. Mr. Morton rhymed. Mr. Morton was lonely. Mr. Morton was, until Pearl showed up with a single rose. Who says women can't propose? Now Mr. Morton is happy, and Pearl and the cat are too. They're the subject of the sentence, and what the predicate says, they do.
Okay, hopefully what you came up with for Mr. Morton were a whole bunch of action words, like Mr. Morton talked, Mr. Morton wrote, but you also heard some linking verbs like Mr. Morton was lonely, Mr. Morton was nervous. So you have both action verbs where Mr. Morton does something, and you have linking verbs where Mr. Morton is in a state of being some emotion. So you might be asking, well, why is it important to know about a complete sentence? Here's why. Because knowing about a complete sentence will help you to avoid the dastardly run-on sentence and sentence fragment. Now, these are two mistakes in our writing that we want to avoid, and they are the most common mistakes that young writers make. So figuring this out early on is going to help you to correct those mistakes and to write like an awesome grammarian as opposed to kind of a grammatical doofus. All right, now we're going to talk a little bit more about those writing mistakes a little bit later in a different screencast. So now we are ready to identify some subjects and predicates. So I want you all to write these 5 sentences down in your notes, and I want you to underline the subject once, and I want you to underline the predicate twice. So that's going to be your way of coding your sentences. We were coding them with colors, blue and red. You're going to code them with underlines. Single underline for subject, double underline for predicate. Okay, by now, the hope is that you have a working understanding of the words subject, predicate, noun, pronoun, verb, and complete thought. Be ready for a quiz. You'll need to be able to define these terms and identify them in a sentence or two for your upcoming quiz. Thanks so much. We'll see you in class.